Welcome to WNIN Lawmakers. I'm John Gibson, news manager and local host of WNIN FM's Morning Edition. Before we check in with Senator Becker and Representative McNamara, here's a report from Indiana Public Broadcasting's Brandon Smith on what happened in the General Assembly this past week.
Bills to allow speed cameras in highway construction zones have been offered for years, but they've never been passed by the full House until this week. The legislation would allow cameras in 4 work zones statewide, and drivers going at least 11 miles per hour above the speed limit could be ticketed if captured by the cameras. Almost no one testified in opposition to a bill that allows immigrants without documentation to get driving privilege cards, but the measure only cleared a Senate committee by a 5-4 vote. Some senators think people who've broken the law are being rewarded by the bill, but supporters say allowing undocumented immigrants to get driving cards will improve public safety. And a bill to provide property tax relief got a lot more complicated as a House committee tried to reduce the negative impact such relief would have on the budgets of local governments and schools. The bill, which its author says has lots of moving parts, is likely to undergo more changes by the end of session. For Indiana Public Broadcasting, I'm Brandon Smith at the State House.
We're joined now by Indiana State Senator Vaneta Becker, who represents Warwick County and a small portion of eastern Vanderburgh County, and State Representative Wendy McNamara, whose district includes all of Posey County and a portion of western Vanderburgh County. I'd like to thank you both for coming in. We certainly appreciate it. Well, let's start off with some of the bills that Brandon was talking about there. Brandon mentioned House Bill 1008, which would allow speed cameras in construction zones. It's passed the House, and the Senate passed a similar bill last year. As we mentioned, it's a House bill. What do you think of it, Representative McNamara?
I supported the measure. It's a pilot. It's only going to be allowed in 4 zones at the same time.
Across Indiana.
Across Indiana. Right. It will not give you a ticket if you're 1 mile over or 2 miles over. You have to be 11 miles over in the speed zone. A lot of people are concerned that this might be a slippery slope. You hear that a lot. Right. So Representative Pressel, who's the bill's author, spent a lot of time really trying to make sure that it's used appropriately, and that's why they're doing a pilot to begin with. And you know, it'll be interesting to see how it's implemented. And if, you know, things cut down, or if it cuts down on the amount of injuries to NDOT workers and the number of accidents that are in our work zones. So it'll be interesting to watch that one go forward.
Yes, indeed. Well, let's turn to Senator Becker, because that bill is moving to the Senate now. And the Senate passed a similar bill last year. What are your thoughts on that idea?
Well, I think that's just the beginning of having cameras everywhere in the state of Indiana, including locally. That's what'll be next. And so I'm not sure. I'm going to wait and listen to the testimony and read the bill, which I haven't seen yet. So, you know, if we can improve safety, that would be a good thing. So I'll just have to see. So, well, I know Representative McNamara mentioned a possible slippery slope. Do you have those kind of concerns?
Yes,
that
I
this
do.
would lead
like
to
I said,
surveillance cameras everywhere?
I think we're going to see it in cities and towns next, and so that would be my concern.
Yeah. So you'd like to see limits on that?
I would like to see limits on it, yes.
Yeah. Okay. Well, another bill that Brandon mentioned in his report was Senate Bill 376. That would allow undocumented immigrants to get driving privilege cards. Now, they're not full-fledged driver's licenses, but a driving privilege card. It's passed a committee. It's headed now to the full Senate. Senator Becker, what are your thoughts on that idea?
Well, I think in northern Indiana in particular, they're really scurrying for workers, and they need more workers, and this would allow people to have limited driving licenses. I think you're going to see a lot more opposition when this bill comes to the floor. Yeah. I've talked to a couple of attorneys that serve close to me on the floor, and they're very concerned about it.
As Brandon mentioned in his report, is there concern that essentially you're rewarding people who are here illegally?
Well, I'm not sure what their concerns are. I think that's part of it.
Yeah.
And I think, you know, I know that they need workers, in particular in northern Indiana.
Mm-hmm.
But I don't know. I will listen to the debate when it comes to the floor and try to make an informed decision. This is really an issue that the federal government needs to settle, and they haven't been able to come to any consensus over the years. But we need to help those DACA workers, young people that came to this country that actually were born here, but their parents were from somewhere else, and I think we need to address that issue. Really, at the federal level is the appropriate place to do it. But again, they're looking for places, ways they can help in northern Indiana. This came from Senator Dorio, I believe, and he represents a district in northern Indiana.
Gotcha. Well, Representative McNamara, I realize this is a Senate bill at this point, but I know that at least in some parts of the state there is lots of demand for immigrant labor. What are your thoughts on allowing these driving privilege cards?
We had a similar bill heard this week in the House, but it was very restricted to the Ukrainians that are here in Indiana to help them get driving privileges. And you think about the different circumstances by which they're here versus, let's say, an immigrant here for labor, for example. Again, we're going to have that conversation and see what the Senate bill, if it makes it out of the Senate and when it comes over. But, you know, you look at the circumstances behind and the intentions behind it. I would hope that there was some sort of follow-up about the illegality, and that would just be my concern, and gives me some pause. But again, bills change very quickly from day to day, so you never know what it looks like today might be different tomorrow. So.
Well, what would it take to be something that you could vote for?
I don't know what the content is of it, so I would just have to wait and see.
Yeah. All right. Well, another story that I believe it was the third story that Brandon brought up in his report was House Bill 1499. Now that calls for a decrease in property taxes. The House committee made it a little more complicated than it was originally. The concerns, as you might imagine, are local budgets like school corporations and municipalities. We'll start with you, Representative McNamara. What do you think about adjusting the state's property taxes?
Property taxes, I'm not familiar with that bill because it's still in committee, but property taxes has been the #1 issue that a lot of my constituents have brought up. The concerns over the increase in assessed values of homes, sometimes 35, 45, 50% more than what their current rate is. It's something that I feel the legislature needs to weigh in on. I don't know what the parameters of that bill look like, but it's definitely something that we need to address, especially when these tax bills come out for a lot of people. They're going to look at it and be shocked because their assessments are going to go up. And as legislators, maybe we can do something to hone in on the actual assessed value piece, but as far as the current tax bills that folks are going to be getting, we can't do anything about that. And I don't know if that bill addresses that issue, but I do know I've had a lot of phone calls from local people concerned about their increase in property taxes and the fact that their assessed values are making that go up.
Senator Becker, let's bring it over to you. The idea of decreasing property taxes at the state level, do you have any concerns about doing that, especially in terms of the impact it would have on local
Well, I think we have to do something. As a realtor, I can tell you that assessments have gone up dramatically. In fact, I brought this to the attention of the Senate leadership last year. I said, if we don't do something, we're going to hear from people. And so they're working on something, but I don't know what the parameters are, but we need to address it because with property values escalating so much and housing in short supply, it's just going to continue, and we need to address it because a lot of people are not even going to be able to afford to live in their own home anymore with what we're going to see on some of these increases. But I think we have the capability of dealing with it. It may mean that something else has to go, but we need to address it.
Well, as a realtor, you know better than anyone.
Yes.
Housing prices have just been skyrocketing. So you think there is a way that you can sort of offset some of that?
Yes. And I think we do need to deal with the impact on local units of government, because they're struggling with the same issue, and their needs are just as important as the state needs. And we have, while we have a surplus right now, we don't know how long it's going to be. I know that Senator Mishler, our budget person, is very cautious, but I think we have to deal with it.
Yeah. Well, let's talk a little bit about the budget session. This is a budget session, the state budget. The governor presented his priorities for things he would like to see. I guess let's get your reactions to the governor's recommendations and what you think of them, what you think may or may not be funded. And I guess Senator Becker, we'll start with you.
Well, I think actually he's presented a good budget bill. In fact, I'm carrying a bill that I brought to him this past summer. It's the Dolly Parton Imagination Library.
Oh,
and we want to make it so that it's statewide and allow all communities to participate that want to.
And then can you shed a little light on that for those who may not know?
Yeah, basically what it does, and when I went to talk to him, he said, your timing's perfect because I'm looking for things to help young readers. What this bill does is, along with collaboration with Dolly Parton, she's been doing this for years. There are several states that already have done this: Missouri, Ohio, Colorado, just to name a few. But so what they do is, as women come out of having a baby, they give them something to sign up, if they so choose, for their children, for their child, and they provide them a book a month from birth to the age of 5. And we know that the majority of a child's brain development does occur between birth and the age of 5. So this would be something to help them learn to read. Plus, it increases the feelings and empathy between mother and baby. And so this will help young Hoosiers to learn to read a lot faster, will help them to be better prepared for kindergarten and preschool. So I think it's a very, actually it was brought to me by a teacher in Warwick County where they have it, but it's they raise money for it, they try to fundraise for it. Plus I think Centerpoint gives them some contributions toward that because they believe in the program as well. So it's Senate Bill 340 right now. It's passed out of education and it's pending in the Appropriations Committee.
Before we talk about the budget more generally, Representative McNamara, what do you think of that particular program?
Well, we were somewhere last week and they spoke to that program and they provided us with samples, and a lady was very excited to come up to me to tell me that she, signed her granddaughter up, as soon as she was born. I too am carrying one of the governor's agenda items, and that's the 1492, which is a school safety bill. Currently, it's funded at about 19 million per year. Trying to raise that up to 26 million, and make sure that every community, regardless of the size of your school corporation, has the opportunity to get these grants. Oftentimes, there's a lot more requests for grants than the money available. We feel that at 26 million, we should be able to honor all those grants. It also expands what you can use the grant for, technology, capital projects, even law enforcement, and even a canine dog. So it is in the same position, passed out of education last week, and is in Ways and Means.
So the school safety measure, you're looking for it to get bigger. How would it perhaps change, say, Evansville, Vanderburgh County schools?
So I would say Evansville, the community, is a little bit ahead of the rest of the state. This same bill I was the author of in 2019, which created these county safety commissions, and Evansville jumped right on that. Some of our counties have not done that yet. This will require them to be able to do that in order to receive funding from the grants. And I will tell you, it's a collaboration amongst fire, law enforcement, schools, public and non-public, emergency management systems, and putting everybody on the same page. Hopefully we'll never ever have to use it, but if that should happen, there'll be plans and plans available. So putting everybody on the same page in the state isn't a bad thing. It'll be safer for our kids and provide more training for our teachers, and having an open line of communication between local law enforcement, fire, and schools is also a very good thing.
Would that bill also allow teachers to have guns in the classroom?
This bill does not.
Okay. I know there have been some proposals along those lines. Just speaking generally about the budget plan from the governor, to give you a chance to respond to that, do you, Senator Becker called it a good budget. Do you feel the same way?
Yeah, I'm partial to a portion of it for the court system. The Supreme Court has a big budget item in there for me in particular that I was asking for. They are redoing the entire technological system to try to really get a data system. So in real time, when law enforcement pulls somebody over, they can be notified if this person is a violent offender or someone that has a propensity for violence with law enforcement. Right now, it's if they know about this person or if they're in that community. We've had a couple shootings of law enforcement personnel because they didn't know what they were walking into because they were in a different county.
So this would speed up the
hopefully it opens the line of
transmission
communications between counties so that they know what they're doing with.
Yeah, yeah.
So.
Well, let's move on to some other bills that are taking shape. Senate Bill 7 just passed the full Senate. It would prohibit non-compete clauses for doctors. Senator Becker, can you tell us how you voted on that and why?
I voted against it in committee because I was very concerned about Deaconess Hospital. Their non-compete clause was just for a year, and then after a year, and if they let you go, if they said there was no position, it didn't apply to you at all. So I thought that was pretty reasonable, but then I found out that Ascension, it's 2 years and only 25 miles, I think, that they can go. So, or 50, I think it's 50. They can't go beyond 50. So I changed my vote on the floor after I heard from more physicians. So I think it's a good thing ultimately. So basically, because our doctors are mobile, they move, and there's a shortage of physicians to start with. So I think it'll be good. It'll give doctors more opportunities to stay within their own community and not leave and go somewhere else.
Right. Representative McNamara, again, I realize it's a Senate bill. What do you think of the idea of getting rid of those non-competes? Do you think that would improve or perhaps slow this doctor shortage that we're seeing?
I do. We've had similar measures in the House, and I think we might be discussing it at the current time as well.
Okay.
But we are in a situation where specialties in particular, you know, I know Deaconess has one of the only fetal fatal anomaly doctors in the whole region, and trying to make sure that you keep people and can attract people is really the critical piece of this. And a lot of times, sometimes these no-competes are so restrictive that a lot of the doctors will just move and we lose that person. So hopefully we can find an area that benefits both sides, the doctor themselves, but as well as the hospitals.
All right, and in the healthcare realm here, Representative McNamara, you've been involved in House Bill 1009. It would increase financial support for pregnant women. Originally, it included child support beginning at conception. That was amended in committee. Can you explain, what's in that bill now as it moves to the full House?
I'm not sure what they did in committee. I believe that was just heard this week.
Right.
I'm not sure what exactly was added to it or taken away from it. The idea was to make sure that people understand that at conception, there are two people involved, and not put the burden totally on the female throughout the entire pregnancy. And that's what the genesis was of the child support at birth. So I have no idea what's in the bill now or what it looks like, but that was the
And that's the way you'd like to see it?
If we can make it happen, yes. It makes sense for two people. You have a lot of the financial responsibility in some cases falling on the woman only. There's all sorts of questions about how do you prove paternity, how do you prove this, how do you prove that. But you know, I think there's ways around those concerns by putting in caveats of whatever DNA tests afterwards, paternity tests afterwards. But I think it's important to make sure that from the beginning you have two partners.
Yeah. Well, I'll let Senator Becker weigh in on that. I realize it's a House bill. What are your thoughts about increasing financial support for pregnant women?
I think it's important. Right now, Indiana's infant mortality rate is one of the highest in the country, and our maternal health rates are also extremely high. So I think it would be a good thing. And again, I think Wendy's right. The responsibility is between two people, not just one.
Right.
And I think that if there's some way you can do it that's legal and passes all the tests, then we should do it.
All right. Well, let's move on to a measure that Senator Becker, I believe you're behind. It regards mercury and the Ohio River. Can you tell us basically what that's about and where that bill stands?
It's going to be heard in committee Monday morning at 9 o'clock in the Environmental Committee in the Senate. And it really deals with our wastewater treatment and the new facility that we are in the process of building. And I've talked with IDEM, talked with the lobbyist for the city. We have an amendment trying, basically what it will do is it will just say that you can't, whatever mercury you take out of the river, you then end up putting back in the river cannot exceed what you took out originally. And the reason for that is if we can't get that done, ratepayers are going to pay an additional $40 million for that treatment facility. So it's extremely important that we get this done, get it passed.
Representative McNamara, would you want to weigh in on that idea?
Well, I'll leave it in her hands because this is new to me, the conversations.
Sure, sure. Well, let's move on to something I believe you are a little more familiar with, Representative McNamara. It's House Bill 1194. It deals with competency to stand trial. It's apparently passed the House, headed now to the Senate. Can you tell us, did you support that?
Well, that's my bill. So.
It is your bill, so I'm guessing you supported it.
Yeah, I sure did.
Pretty safe assumption there.
I did. So right now, in order to determine somebody to be competent to stand trial, there has to be two people that evaluate or do an assessment of the individual. And they're limited to physicians, psychiatrists, or psychologists. And there's a bottleneck that's occurring in the state of Indiana because there aren't people qualified to actually do that assessment. So my bill would expand that to a physician assistant and an APRN with psychiatric credentials. Right now, your average person might be waiting 6 to 8 months in jail for a competency assessment. That's just to be assessed on whether or not they're competent or not. So when we add 2 more people to the mix, that gives the local prosecutor, defense attorney, the opportunity to find other people that can determine their competency, hopefully get the people out of jail quicker who might be sitting there trying to determine their competency, but at the same time, give them the necessary skills to help them become competent. And it also allows, if the prosecution defense agree, they can agree to one assessment and determine that. And then the other big piece, it allows for charges to be dismissed if the person would have Alzheimer's, dementia, traumatic brain injury, something that we know is never going to be recoverable. It allows them the opportunity to have those charges dismissed but it only has to be a level 6 or a misdemeanor in order for that to happen.
Gotcha. We have just a couple of minutes left. I'd like to give you each a brief moment here to perhaps talk about another bill that we haven't brought up. Senator Becker?
Senate Bill 1 deals with mental health, and we are trying very desperately to expand that bill. And I know that Judge Shively is very interested in getting money from the state for his mental health programs at the court level. So I've talked to Senate sponsors of the bill, and they are sympathetic. It just depends on how much money they end up putting into that bill. But we do need more treatment programs. I know they're going to help expand funding for our community mental health centers statewide, so that's very important.
In the closing minute we have, Representative McNamara, anything you'd like to touch on that we haven't touched on?
Yeah, I do have 2 bills that are probably going to be folded into the budget. One is to provide $5 million to law enforcement academies. Southwestern Indiana Law Enforcement Academy, ILEA is the Indianapolis one, and then Northwest Law Enforcement Academy. They don't have a way to generate any dollars for training, so that would allow that to happen. And then there's a $60 million ask for juvenile justice reform. Over the last 4 years, I've spent studying, working with hundreds of people. Retired Supreme Court Justice Stephen David is in charge of this reform, and it'll help us with all 92 counties be on the same page for kids.
All right, we'll have to leave it there. Thanks again for being with us, Senator Becker and Representative McNamara. I'm John Gibson of WNIN FM. Thank you for watching WNIN Lawmakers.